Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Hi, my name is Kim Sharman. I'm a reading and remediation specialist. I work with kids kindergarten to college level, and I work with kids with ADHD, dyslexia, and dysgraphia.
Okay. Thank you for all the comments to those of you who have been watching the videos. And we've had some really interesting questions about what the WISC, if you have attention deficit, what effect does it have on the WISC, and what role does like dyslexia or dysgraphia play in the WISC? So, Kim, from what you know, um, how do you think attention deficit, ADHD, plays a role, or what people are calling ADD plays a role in how you perform on an IQ test?
Wow, loaded question. It's a big deal, and it can impact your score greatly and give you an erroneous score if you do have ADHD and you take the WISC. The kid doesn't have the ability to concentrate and hold his level of attention to persevere and answer the questions he or she does know. So Cindy's one of the few people that I know that actually requests the parents test for ADHD if she smells it before she gives the test.
So I tell parents that I see a 7 to 30 point shift in IQ on and off stimulant medication. And the reason I can make that statement is I've had kids that have been evaluated by other clinicians, and ADHD was missed. And then we actually treat the ADHD, and a kid comes in to take the IQ test, and suddenly we get dramatically different results. Now, I am a stickler of adhering to norms. I am a stickler about reviewing answers, so I'm not intentionally inflating scores. I score very strictly to the protocol, and I adhere to the protocol standards um, in exactly the way they're written. I read verbatim from the manual. I check my answers. I record answers, the whole 9 yards, so that I've got robust data. So it is a really interesting element. So let's talk for a minute about that. I'm going to pull up the cover sheet of the WISC for us to take a look at, and um, there's no copyright issue here because when you actually look at the WISC protocol, it actually says you can tear this page off and actually hand it to parents, and it gives you another place to record. So let's kind of talk about the role that attention plays in many of these subtests. Now, we've talked before about the fact that when you are getting a full scale IQ, you are using these 7 subtests. And so on a WISC 4, you would use 10 subtests. On a WISC 5, you use 7. Okay. And we have a video that talks about each of the subtests and kind of gives a mocked example of what that is. But Kim, do you remember what block design is?
Oh, yes. That's the one. I'm not very good at it. Yes.
You're
It's
better
visual.
at it than you think you are, and you
I'm
told me
better now,
earlier.
but visual spatial integration and your
So
ability.
you have a design and you're given red and white blocks and you have to build them. Now, one of the things that I see happen with a lot of kids is they look at the target and then they go to work with the blocks and they throw it together and they say done, and they don't go back and check if their response on the top of the blocks looks exactly the same as the actual picture. And if you rotate one cube 45 degrees, you just got zero. Sorry, not 45 degrees, 90 degrees, you got 0 points. Okay. So just that, am I paying attention and am I going back to check my work? That's a great example of how that can decimate your score on block design. The other thing that can happen is kids can be working and be oblivious to the fact, and we're not supposed to make it obvious, but you're actually timing them. And so they're just sitting there kind of working it, and they're oblivious to how much time has passed. And so once you get past a certain amount of time, you lose all the bonus points for speed.
Is it an ample? I thought it wasn't timed. It is timed.
It is timed.
Hmm.
It is a timed subtest. Okay.
So not
Now,
paying attention to detail, not being able to pull back and have an objective viewpoint of, hey, I have extra time to go and check my work and compare it.
or maybe I should check my work.
Right. Not even thinking about that.
right? So the other thing that I see kids do all the time is they'll spin blocks. Like they'll put the block down in one orientation and they're like, no, that's not right. So then they flip it and they put it back in the exact same orientation. Like they
Impulsive.
don't think
Yes.
about how the block actually fits in. Now, some of that is developmental and that's to be expected, but there's also a component of taking a step back and like, wow, what is it supposed to look like? Now let me orient the block and put it in. Okay.
I mean, there's some impulsivity going on there because I know because I did it
Yeah. Yeah.
without that higher level thinking that you have from being calm and being to see the whole big picture.
Yeah. A level of focus, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the similarities subtest, I give you two words and I ask you how they are like. So how do you think attention might play a role there?
Um, this is like a deeper kind of more esoteric, or is that the word, or abstract? You have to really think deeply. And again, once again, you can't have that impulsivity that oftentimes comes with ADHD if you want to get a deeper meaning as to how these two words are alike.
Yes. And so on that task, there's multiple categories of points. Okay. And so if you give me a first off the top of the head response that doesn't score any points and doesn't have a query mark after it, you've just lost points on that item, even though you might know it. Even though if you had taken 2 seconds and expanded on that, you would have given more depth and more breadth, and you would have been able to demonstrate how much of that you actually knew. Okay. So that's another great place where, oh my gosh, if we put brakes on the car, that would be great. Okay. All right. By the way, on similarities, it's all oral. So I'm reading you the words and I'm reading you the prompt of in what way are blah and blah alike. And I'm saying that without having the protocol in front of me or the manual in front of me. And I know there's a slight differentiation in the words there. So don't ding me on that. But and then the query is tell me more about that. And so being aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it is super important. And taking 2 seconds and thinking about what you're going to say, not even 2 seconds, just slowing down, speaking your answer, and adding depth to what you're trying to say is significant. Okay, matrix reasoning. Do you remember what that subtest is?
I can't remember if this is the code. I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Okay, that's okay. You don't administer these all the time. I do. So matrix reasoning is the one where I give you a get my focus. There we go. We got it focused. I did not clean my space prior to this. My apologies, everybody. So you're either given a 4x4 square in which you have something like this, and then on this one, and you have a question mark, and then you have
Oh,
a variety of choices down
yes.
below. So that's one kind of prompt. The other is you have a sequence of pictures and you're missing a picture, and then you have 5 choices down below, and you have to decide which goes there to complete the sequence. Okay.
It's a bit of pattern recognition
It's
also.
100% pattern recognition. So one
Okay,
is a sequential recognition and the other is a matrix recognition. Do you
I see.
understand the difference between those two?
Yes, the matrix just refers to the structure that,
Matrix is more of an analogy, right? This has
right.
this relationship, so this has this relationship. You can also work them vertically with this has this relationship, so this has this relationship. Okay. And the matrix can be a 2x2. It can also be a 3x3. Okay.
So
Now,
analogy and patterning are part of matrix reasoning. How does
yeah,
ADHD affect that?
how would it affect that?
Well, again, a kid oftentimes with, and again, I shouldn't generalize, but a lot of times ADHD, we want to be impulsive and just come up with the answer. And there's not that stepping back and looking for these deeper intellectual level um, thinking processes. I mean, it's much harder to access that intelligence in your brain when you're feeling very.
So let me give you an even more concrete example of that. So let's say that was that's an answer. And down here on the bottom, you have answer choices like this,
Mm,
and you have an answer choice like that,
mhm,
and you have an answer choice like this, and you have an answer choice like this, and you have an answer choice like that.
mhm.
Okay. What might somebody who is impulsive do?
Oh, I mean, they could easily just pick the lime green circle by mistake, or they could easily pick, the triangle because it's the same color. I mean, there's so many different impulsive decisions you could make.
I see
Oh, and they
kids
could
do
pick,
that where they pick
yeah,
the
they could do
exact
that.
same one,
You're
right?
right, because they could just look at it in a vertical way and not see that this is a matrix going from left to right.
Or top to bottom. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that attention to detail, that ability to slow down, think about what's actually happening, and then respond. Okay, now here's the other really important thing. On all of these tests, so prior to the WISC V, the ceiling, the maximum number of errors that you could make was much higher. So in the past, you would have 4 errors in a row and you reach ceiling, meaning we stop the test because we feel like we've reached the maximum of your ability to perform on this. What they've done to make administration of the test faster is they've lowered the
Boy.
ceiling. And so you go from 4 errors to 3.
Mm,
And so that threshold becomes lower. So if you are making repetitive errors, you get stopped, even though you may be able to solve some of the hardest problems correctly. The other challenge is that as you get older, the way that the test is scored, and so I'm just going to make this up randomly. This is not real in any stretch of the imagination. But let's say we're talking about matrix reasoning, and we're talking about a 14-year-old 9 months. Okay. So when they have the score table on this side, and I'm just going to put dots, and I'm going to make it a little bigger here. I think I can squeeze 19 in there. Okay. So on matrix reasoning, let's say you have a raw score of, let's say there's 50 questions on there, which it's not, but we're going to give that anyway. And a 30 is required. So let's not say it's 50, let's say it's 40. And a 30, you have to get 30 items correct to get an average score of 50 in the 50th, or sorry, an average score, standard score of 10 in the 50th percentile.
okay.
Okay. As you go up, you may have, so for example, here you might have a 33 to a 35, and then it might jump to a 36 and a 37 through 38, and then a 39 and a 40. So you begin to have these gaps where one question dramatically changes your score. Okay. So if you miss 2 relatively easy items, you go from scoring at the very top end of the test to automatically scoring in the 98th percentile. And what it does in the overall average is it has this huge cascade effect. And so the older you are, each item becomes more and more valuable. And so making a mistake on an early item automatically limits the maximum score you can get. So
Can I ask a parent question about this?
sure.
Everybody, well, first of all, I want to make sure that people know that you can't coach an IQ score. Okay. You do not coach this. This is not something that you want to train your kids to do because for various reasons. The second question is this: why is it that if your IQ stays the same from when you're 10 versus when you're 18, why is it that you should be getting better at it if it's supposed to be staying the same?
Okay, so that's a really good complex question. So there are confidence intervals, and a confidence interval means that if we were to test you again and there's a 90% or 95% confidence interval, that there's a chance that you would score between those two barriers, okay, or those two numbers. So let's say if you took the WISC and you scored a 94, the confidence interval would be like 85 to 99, meaning if we gave you that test again later, there's a 95% chance that your score would fall in between those.
I see.
Okay. And so we don't expect the number to stay exactly the same.
I
Okay.
see. So it's not that you're improving with intelligence as you get older.
Now that's the next piece, is they are trying to assess your development as time goes on. So a young student will understand a problem like this where we just have growth in circles, right? And we put a question mark. Whereas that same student, if you gave them a variation that looked like something like that, and then they had to figure out what was coming next, because the pattern changes, they might struggle with that. Or we could do something like, and I keep putting my things to whatever. We might do something where you have and I'm trying not to use anything from a test.
I see.
Where the challenge is that you're changing more elements of the item.
So
Okay.
we do become more sophisticated, even though our IQ generally stays the same. There's a window or standard deviation on either side that we expect to score in because we do become more sophisticated with our thinking process.
And so the complexity of the items that you're expected to get as you get older is higher. Okay. And that's part of what they're measuring. If you wanted to be really nuanced, you would talk about Piaget's zones of proximal development, or not Piaget, zone of proximal development, but you would talk about Piaget's levels of development in terms of your ability to conceptualize different things. And so that's part of what the test is measuring. We go from concrete to way more abstract, and the older you get, the more you're expected to be able to abstract.
Abstract thinking development comes with age.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And so the items just get harder as you go along because they're trying to measure your development.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, now I get it.
Okay. And again, if we go back to, are you paying attention or not? That's, if you're not paying attention and the items get more difficult, then, and you're not attending to those subtle details, it tanks. All right, digit span is an obvious one that drops out for ADHD. And the reason that it drops out is I'm reading you a series of numbers, and if you zone out for 1 second and you miss the number, you're gone.
You're gone.
Okay. And they do it forward and they do it backwards, and then they have you sort in sequence. Okay. All right. Coding. Do you remember what coding is?
Yes.
What is coding?
Coding is an integral part of reading, being able to take a symbol and being able to find that symbol on another. Is that right?
So you're thinking of a different coding subtest. So on this one, they have a number bar across the top, and it's got a number and a special symbol down below.
Oh, yes.
And then down below, they have a whole bunch of numbers, and you're supposed to translate the numbers into symbols.
Back and forth, back and forth. So it's
or
like
theoretically, you memorize them.
right.
Okay.
But it's like Morse code, like trying to
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this one is the one that tends to pop for dysgraphia, because there's this motor component of how do I make these uncommon symbols, not ones that I've made on a regular basis. And I have to learn a new motor pattern. and I have to do it quickly, and I have to have it memorized. Okay. By the way, block design, if you have poor fine motor skills, that can affect your ability to get the blocks in place. So if you have that characteristic of your dysgraphia, your block design score can be popped because of that. Now, the coding also relies on, you guessed it, attention.
Concentration, yeah, attention.
Okay. So if you're not paying attention, you'll write the wrong symbol in, and then you'll look at me and say, what do I do if I make a mistake? And I say, keep going. So you've just lost time there. And again, a couple of symbols can change your score pretty dramatically. Yes.
So so even if you have dysgraphia, but a high IQ, and let's say you don't have ADHD, can you still do well on the coding? Or does that your dysgraphia bring that down too? Like, are there parameters in the grading of this that allow for strange?
So that's where, if your coding score is significantly lower than all of your other subtest scores, that's where you'd move to a general ability index. And we have a whole video on that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the GAI versus the full scale IQ. So go watch that one if that's a question. But if you have scores that don't sit, I mean, that's the one value, that's a value of having this chart, is you actually put in your students' numbers and graph how they did on particular things. And you might see, sorry, that was a bad drawing there. Let's undo that one. You might see a dramatic change in the score profile on particular subtests where other factors are getting in their way. So you might see something like that where you had relatively high scores and then all of a sudden you have these really low scores. Okay. Figure weights. Figure weights is the one with the scales and the algebra, and you've got the symbols and okay. So if you remember, we talked about in the matrix reasoning, you're looking for a pattern, okay? On this one, we have our lovely scale, and on this side, you'll have one set of shapes, and on this side, you'll have the other set of shapes, okay? And then you'll have response choices down below. So let's say we've got 2 there, and we might have a ratio of like so. Oh, that's not going to work. Let's do that. And then you'd have to figure out
Oh, I see.
what would balance the scale over here. And if your response choices down below, one of your response choices was this, and you didn't notice that the color was different, but it's the right proportion, you just lost credit on that item.
Are they literally filling it in?
They're pointing to one of 5 answer
drawing it.
choices down below. So that's
And
my
again,
abbreviated diagram.
in addition, is this also this isn't one of the regular 7 on WISC 5?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. So does this also give a little hint towards maybe dyscalculia too, or is it still having to do with that patterny kind of?
Figure weights can give us information about not visual spatial, but quantitative reasoning and the ability to conceptualize number.
Okay,
And
got it.
so, yes, you can have kids that have problems with math that struggle on this particular subtest.
I get it. Okay.
That's a really great question. Okay, so those are the 7 core, and just in those, you can see how much attention plays a role. You can also begin to see in places where dysgraphia plays a role. So let's talk about the potential for dyslexia to play a role. Okay. So one of the characteristics for individuals with dyslexia is what we call rapid naming or word retrieval. And that's that tip of the tongue phenomenon where you know a word and you can't come up with it to save your life. And so you see a word, you go to read it, and you pull a different label. Okay. So that can affect your performance, like on the similarities. Oh, we skipped vocabulary, or on the vocabulary subtest. By the way, on the vocabulary subtest, I read you a word and you have to tell me the meaning of the word. And if you're not specific enough, I get to query you. Okay. So on both similarities and vocabulary, often they're looking for key terms to get you the higher scoring value. And if kids talk around those terms and never actually get to some of those key words, you won't get credit. Now, the good thing about similarities and vocabulary is there's a really significant range of answers. So there's ways you can often get there, but the student has to be persistent enough to continue to talk to kind of get you to those concepts. Okay. So that kind of gives you a sense of where other processing or other neurological components can play a role in how you perform on the WISC. So we will be back with more videos.
Thank you. That's good. I like